Hi, Susan.
Hello, Stephanie.
Good to see you. Thanks for talking with us today.
Well, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm sorry it took so
So,
long to get this organized.
of course, of course. So, why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about where you work?
Well, I work at the Maryland Historical Trust. We are one of the 8 states in America that has a dedicated maritime archaeology program. And we have all state waters, tidal waters, although we actually do look at some of the others. We don't, Maryland does not have any natural lakes, so it's a little unusual for as far as managing most states, but we manage all of Maryland's waters for heritage resources, which are not just shipwrecks, but largely, but it could be eroded contact period colonial sites, they could be submerged pre-contact sites of indigenous peoples, it can be other maritime cultural landscape elements such as marine railways, lighthouse bases, bridge abutments, things like that. And we manage the resources for the state. We survey them and we advise and make recommendations for their best management for the citizens.
Yes, Maryland has thousands of miles of waterways. Very interesting. So, what is your favorite thing about your job?
The diversity. It doesn't always fit on the days you want it, but the fact that it's never a dull moment. There's always something interesting going on. And it's everything from dealing with First Nations to a rubber-coated submarine to World War I sites to a well from a settlement. There's just, and you meet the coolest people. You get calls. It's spring. I know it's spring. I've had 3 calls about wrecks being found in 3 completely different parts of the state. So, and the people who report them are always really nice. It's fun to talk to them, and they try really hard to do the right thing, and they're our stakeholders.
Sure, you never know where you're going to end up some days, right?
Never, never. I was paddling out looking at a wreck last Wednesday.
Hmm. Um, so, how did you first get into archaeology and what has kept you in it all these years?
All these years. That's the scary part, you know. I started diving in 1977, so it was a long time ago. And I'd always been interested in archaeology and anthropology. My family was always history oriented. And it just suddenly occurred to me that I could put the two together. And I think what triggered it, and it's why I put this virtual background up, this is January 1959 National Geographic. It was divers in the cenote of Zibel Chaldun. And I don't know why. I mean, at the time, I found this very evocative, and I was not 2 years old at the time. It was my father was allowed to bring home geographics, so he probably brought them home in the mid 1960s. That we had them around the house. But I saw this image, and it has. I didn't realize till decades later that this has stuck with me. So I have a funny feeling this was a triggering point. So, and if you see the whole image, you can't see the diver. He's not. You just see these hands lifting this urn and this green silt swirling out of it. And that I think that was a trigger for me. It's always stuck with me to do maritime and to do archaeology. And staying with it is probably just the cool factor. There's so many neat people. There's so many neat sites. And every now and then you'll say, "Oh, all the good stuff's been found." And then a news article comes out and you go, "Oh, wow." I still have a big wow factor. I've had a few this morning. People sent me notes on stuff, and I go, "That was here? Where'd you find that?" So it's just, it's always exciting.
So, speaking of exciting finds, tell us about your Maryland Archaeology Month essay.
All right. I was asked to write this because it's a funny find in 2 parts. Around 1980, so before our program even existed, a museum director, Ralph Eshelman, and our favorite maritime author, Donald Chalmette, got together with some other folks. And long story short, they ended up working inside a small wooden coffer dam on a wreck site, which they said kept all the snakes in with the divers. Very effective. And one of the things they brought up was a medical kit in a white pine box, and they found several elements of this medical kit, which were conserved and displayed at Calvert Marine Museum. And in 2012, thereabout, we visited this excavation, and Bob Neeland of the Naval History and Heritage Command actually found another pair of scissors, and I don't know if there were more, maybe one, but it was clearly part of this same kit. And the cool part of the story is, and I'd love to know the denouement. It's one of those that we don't have the answer. When the kit was loaned to Barney by the Secretary of the Navy for the use of his surgeon, Thomas Hamilton, he was told, look, this is for the USS Ontario, but it's still being built. Take good care of it. We expect to get it back. So how did it end up there? I'd love to know what happened. And I postulate in the essay, why it may have still ended up being on the ship, especially when they were settling those vessels to march to Bladensburg for clearly another battle. Why would you leave your surgical kit? So I speculate a little bit in the article as to why it may have ended up there and how. But it's wonderful. There's maker's marks from 2 different companies, 2 different periods. One of them has a little crown over the maker's mark. They were only allowed to use that for 1 year, so it really helps date the site. And so it just seemed apropos to be looking at, a doctor's chest and medical instruments at this time.
So this was all related to Barney's flotilla from the War of 1812.
Yes, indeed. Oh, yes. We believe at the time they were calling it the turtle shell wreck because they weren't sure, but we're fairly confident that it was the USS Scorpion, Barney's flagship.
Mm. Yeah, really interesting find. They've done a little bit more work out there since then, I think.
Since 2012, 14, I don't think so.
14, I'm not sure. Well, there's still a lot more to discover in the Patuxent for sure.
Oh, we know that there are at least 2 or 3 more vessels near there, and we know that that the British scuttled some, because when they scuttled the American fleet, there was also merchant vessels with them. And the British captured half a dozen vessels at least because they determined they weren't seaworthy and burned them. And they must have captured others. And then there were the military ones that were sunk. We know there were salvage operations, but we can't believe they got everything. So I think there are still a fair number of vessels up there that we haven't yet located.
So do you see any ties between what you found from these early 1800s shipwrecks and what's going on in the COVID pandemic today?
Not so much for these because, of course, they were actual. Well, there were some apothecary jars and some plates and things that, as well as the actual surgical implements. But I think that the tie-in is more that anybody on a ship knows how fast anything goes through, and the fact that whether it's yellow fever, cholera, dysentery, anything goes through. And that's true. I work on small cruise vessels, and even then, if somebody gets a cold, you can count on how long it'll take to go around the ship. And that's with cleaning handrails and having hand sanitizer long before COVID. So you can sympathize with any sailor or crew member, whether it's today or back then, on how careful you have to be and how hard it is to keep a ship pristine and healthy. And you can imagine back then it must have been even more difficult, as far as being isolated, not being able to get away from anyone either, and not having any Purell.
No Purell, that's for sure. So, speaking of COVID, what is the first thing that you want to do once this is all over and behind us?
Well, I think the first thing would be, I have, touching wood right now, have a trip scheduled in July that I've been asked to lead a group into Cappadocia, Turkey, which I do fairly often. And I said, nobody's going to sign up for this. 21 people have signed up for it already. So yeah, so that may be what the first thing I do. But the thing I want to do is I have a house in Canada that I haven't been to since Christmas 2019. And I'd really like to get up and, I pay people to do the yard work and I have all the security and everything, but I'd like to go to my house. I wanted to put a garden shed in last year. So hopefully I can, when the border opens, I will be going up for a little while anyway. But traveling is big on my list all the time. My mom always says most of us were gypsies somewhere. She said, you can't keep the family home.
I'm also hoping to travel this year. Well, thank you very much, Susan. It was so nice talking to you.
My pleasure. Anytime.